Violet Norwood clutched her shaking hands beneath the folds of her skirt as she stared out the stage-coach window at the approaching town of Wickenburg, Arizona Territory. The year was 1876, and her entire life had just been traded away like cattle at an auction. Her father's debt and his solution had traveled faster than the stage-coach carrying her to her fate. Marriage to Lucas O'Malley, the most feared rancher in the territory. The stories about Lucas O'Malley had reached even Boston, where Violet had lived her entire 20 years. They said he'd killed men for looking at him wrong, that he'd seized his vast ranch through blood and intimidation, that his eyes were as cold as winter in the mountains and twice as deadly. And now, by her father's arrangement, she was to be this man's wife. "Almost there, miss," the driver called back, his voice rattling with the wheels on the dusty road. "Wickenburg just ahead." Violet straightened her back and adjusted her bonnet, determined not to show fear even as it coursed through her veins like ice water. The letter from her father had been clear. Their family's shipping business was ruined, debts had mounted, and the only solution had been to accept O'Malley's offer of marriage in exchange for clearing those debts. Her father hadn't bothered to travel west with her. He'd simply put her on a stagecoach with a trunk of belongings and washed his hands of his responsibility. Wickenburg appeared before her like a mirage in the desert heat, a collection of wooden buildings baking under the Arizona sun, with the promise of water from the Hassayampa River, nearby the only reason for its existence. As the stagecoach rolled down the main street, Violet observed men in dusty clothes, women in practical frontier dresses, and a few native people selling goods at the edge of town. The coach lurched to a stop in front of what appeared to be the town's only hotel, a two-story wooden structure with peeling paint and a sign that read Wickenburg Hotel. Violet remained seated, her courage momentarily failing her. "This is it, miss," the driver said, opening the door. "Someone's meant to meet you here." Violet took a deep breath and stepped down from the coach, her legs stiff from the long journey. The heat hit her immediately, so different from the cool Boston spring she'd left behind. She squinted in the brightness, looking around for whoever might be waiting for her. A tall figure stepped out from the shade of the hotel's porch. He moved with the easy grace of someone completely at home in his own body, a dangerous kind of confidence that made people step aside without thinking. His dark hat shadowed his face, but as he approached, Violet could make out sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Lucas O'Malley. He stood before her, removing his hat in what might have been a gesture of politeness, though his face remained impassive. Close up, Violet could see he wasn't as old as she'd feared, perhaps 30, but the lines around his eyes and the scar cutting through his left eyebrow spoke of a hard life. "Miss Norwood," he said, his voice low and rough as though rarely used. "Welcome to Wickenburg." Violet forced herself to meet his gaze. "Mr. O'Malley," she replied, proud that her voice didn't waver. "I believe you've made arrangements with my father." Something flickered across his face too quick to identify. "I have." He gestured to a wagon parked nearby. "My ranch is a few hours' ride from town. We'll get your belongings and head out now, but I've been traveling for days. Couldn't we stay in town tonight?" And no. The single word cut through her objection like a knife. "There's a storm coming. We need to reach the ranch before it hits." Violet glanced at the clear blue sky above them. "I don't see any sign of you're not from here," he interrupted again. "I can smell it on the wind. We're leaving now." Without waiting for her response, he turned and spoke to the driver about her trunk. Violet stood rigid, a cold knot forming in her stomach. This man would be her husband. She would share his home, his name, his bed. The thought made her feel ill with fear. Within minutes, her trunk was loaded onto the wagon. O'Malley offered his hand to help her climb up to the seat, and though everything in her wanted to refuse his touch, practicality won out. His hand was calloused but steady as she settled beside him on the wooden bench. They rode in silence through the town and out into the open countryside. Violet had never seen such emptiness, miles of desert and scrubland stretching to distant mountains. Back home, there were always buildings, people, the sounds of civilization. Here there was just space and silence, broken only by the creak of the wagon and the steady plod of the horses. After nearly an hour of silence, Violet gathered her courage. "Mr. O'Malley, I think I deserve to know something about the man I'm meant to marry. Why did you agree to this arrangement with my father?" He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I need a wife. There must be women in the territory who would marry you without my father's debts as incentive." His jaw tightened. "I needed someone who wouldn't have. Entanglements. Entanglements. Family nearby, previous suitors, expectations." He glanced at her briefly. "Someone educated who could help with the books and correspondence. Your father said you handled much of his business affairs." Violet was surprised he knew that. She had indeed managed the accounting and correspondence for her father's shipping business for the past 5 years, ever since her mother had died. It was one of the few things that had given her purpose. "So you wanted a wife who was also a secretary?" She couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "I wanted a wife who had a brain," he replied bluntly, "and who wouldn't come with a town full of opinions and connections." Violet fell silent, considering his words. It was practical, she supposed, if cold. As they traveled, the landscape began to change, becoming less barren with more vegetation and rolling hills. The sky ahead was darkening, confirming O'Malley's prediction of a storm. "How much farther?" she asked after another long stretch of silence. "Another hour if we push the horses." The wind had picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain and electricity. Violet held onto her bonnet as it threatened to fly away. O'Malley urged the horses to a faster pace, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. "There," he said suddenly, pointing toward what looked like a collection of buildings nestled in a valley between 2 hills. "That's the ranch." The O'Malley ranch was larger than Violet had expected. A sprawling main house built of stone and timber stood at the center, with various outbuildings, corrals, and bunkhouses spread around it. Men were visible moving quickly around the property, securing equipment and livestock ahead of the storm. As they pulled up to the main house, a middle-aged woman hurried out to meet them. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her weathered face broke into a smile at the sight of them. "Thank the Lord you made it before the storm hit," she called out. "This must be Miss Norwood, Mrs. Caldwell," O'Malley acknowledged as he jumped down from the wagon. "Yes, this is Miss Norwood. She'll be staying in the east bedroom until the wedding." The woman's eyebrows shot up. "The east bedroom, but that's clear across from yours." "I thought, those are the arrangements," O'Malley cut her off firmly. He turned to offer Violet his hand down from the wagon. Violet accepted his assistance, still processing the exchange, so they would have separate rooms at least until the wedding. That was something of a relief. "I'm Martha Caldwell, the housekeeper," the woman said, taking Violet's hand in both of hers. "Been running this house for Mr. O'Malley since he took over the ranch 5 years ago. You must be exhausted from your journey, poor thing." "I am rather tired," Violet admitted. "Lucas, have one of the boys bring in her trunk," Martha instructed, with a familiarity that suggested she was one of the few people who could address O'Malley by his first name. "I'll show Miss Norwood to her room." O'Malley nodded and strode off toward a group of ranch hands, calling out orders as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Martha led Violet into the house. chattering as they went. "We're all so pleased you've come. This house needs a woman's touch, and Mr. O'Malley needs—" Well, he needs someone. Too much alone time isn't good for a soul. The interior of the house was surprisingly well appointed, with solid furniture, clean floors, and even some attempts at decoration. Martha showed her up a wide staircase to the second floor and down a hallway to a pleasant bedroom with windows overlooking the hills behind the property. "This will be your room until the wedding," Martha explained, lighting a lamp as the sky outside continued to darken with the approaching storm. "Bathrooms just next door. We've got indoor plumbing, which is more than most ranches can say. Mr. O'Malley insisted on it when he rebuilt this place." "Rebuilt it?" Violet asked. Martha's expression faltered slightly. "Yes, well, there was a fire before he took over. Nearly burned the whole place to the ground." She busied herself straightening the already made bed. "The Reverend will be out tomorrow to discuss the wedding. Mr. O'Malley's arranged for it to take place 3 days from now here at the ranch." "3 days," Violet exclaimed. "That's very soon." Martha patted her arm sympathetically. "I know it must seem rushed, but Mr. O'Malley isn't one to delay once his mind is made up." She cocked her head to one side, studying Violet. "He's a good man, despite what people say. Hard, yes, but fair, and he takes care of his own." Before Violet could respond, there was a knock at the door, and 2 ranch hands appeared with her trunk. They set it down and quickly departed, clearly uncomfortable in the main house. "I'll have a bath drawn for you," Martha said. "Dinner's at 6 in the dining room downstairs." Mr. O'Malley takes his meals regular, storm or no storm. Left alone, Violet sank onto the edge of the bed, the reality of her situation crashing over her. In 3 days, she would be married to Lucas O'Malley, a man who terrified her, whose reputation was soaked in blood and fear, and who had purchased her like a prized mare to help with his bookkeeping. For the first time since leaving Boston, she allowed herself to cry. The storm raged through dinner, rain lashing at the windows while thunder shook the glass in its frames. Violet had bathed and changed into one of her plainer dresses, a navy blue wool that she hoped struck the right balance between formality and practicality. The dining room was dominated by a long oak table that could easily seat 12, though only 3 places were set, 1 at the head of the table, and 2 on either side. O'Malley was already seated when Martha showed her in, rising briefly as she entered. "Miss Norwood," he acknowledged, waiting for her to take the seat to his right before sitting back down. "Mr. O'Malley." She smoothed her napkin across her lap, acutely aware of the silence between them, broken only by the storm outside and the occasional sounds from the kitchen where Martha worked. Martha emerged with a tureen of what turned out to be a hearty beef stew, followed by a basket of fresh bread. The food was simple but well prepared, and Violet realized how hungry she was after her long journey. They ate in silence for several minutes before O'Malley spoke. "I trust your room is satisfactory." "Yes, thank you. It's very comfortable." Another lengthy silence. "How large is your ranch, Mr. O'Malley?" Violet asked, attempting conversation. 20,000 acres, he replied. "Runs from the Hassaamper River in the east to the foothills in the west. 200 head of cattle, 30 horses. That's substantial," he nodded once. "Takes a lot of work to maintain. 12 men working year-round, more during roundup and branding." Violet took a sip of water, searching for another topic. "Mrs. Caldwell mentioned you rebuilt this house after a fire." O'Malley's hand paused briefly on its way to his glass. 5 years ago. The previous owner wasn't careful with his lamps. Something in his tone suggested there was more to the story, but Violet didn't press. Instead, she asked, "And the wedding? Mrs. Caldwell said it's to be in 3 days. The Reverend will be here tomorrow morning. You can discuss the details with him." He set down his fork. "Unless you object to the timeline." It wasn't really a question, but Violet answered anyway. "I hardly see how my objections would matter, given the circumstances." His eyes, which had been focused on his plate for most of the meal, now lifted to meet hers. They were a deep green, she realized, like pine needles in shadow. "If you want more time, you can have it," he said quietly. The unexpected concession caught Violet off guard. 3 days is sufficient, she found herself saying. "There's little point in delay." He nodded and returned his attention to his meal. After dinner, O'Malley excused himself to check on the livestock, leaving Violet with Martha, who showed her to a small library off the main hall. "Mr. O'Malley thought you might like some books to read," Martha explained. "He's quite the reader himself, though most folks wouldn't guess it." The library was well stocked with a surprising variety of volumes, not just practical manuals on ranching and agriculture, but classics, history, even some poetry. Violet ran her fingers along the spines, finding some comfort in the familiar feel of books. "Has Mr. O'Malley always lived in Arizona?" she asked. Martha, who was lighting additional lamps against the gloom of the storm, shook her head. "No, he came out from New York about 7 years ago. Worked as a foreman on the Blackwell Ranch for a couple years before buying this place after the fire." "Does he have family?" Martha's expression grew careful. "Not anymore. Lost his parents young from what little he said. Had a brother who died in the war." She straightened a lampshade unnecessarily. "Mr. O'Malley doesn't speak much about his past, miss. Not to anyone." Violet selected a volume of Emerson's essays and settled into an armchair. "Thank you for your kindness today, Mrs. Caldwell. It's made things easier." The older woman smiled warmly. "You're going to bring some life back to this house, Miss Norwood. I feel it in my bones." She headed for the door. "I'll be up for another hour or so if you need anything. Just ring the bell." Left alone in the library, Violet tried to concentrate on Emerson, but her thoughts kept drifting to her situation. Lucas O'Malley wasn't what she had expected. Cold, yes, and intimidating, but not the cruel tyrant she'd feared. His offer to delay the wedding had been surprising and unexpected consideration for her feelings. Still, the stories of his violence couldn't all be fabrications. The scar on his face, the way the ranch hands moved nervously around him, the careful way Martha had evaded questions about his past all pointed to a dangerous man. Violet wasn't sure which was worse. Marrying a monster, or marrying a man so complex she couldn't predict what he might do. The following morning dawned clear and fresh, the storm having washed away the dust and leaving the landscape vibrant in the early light. Violet woke early, having slept surprisingly well in the comfortable bed, and dressed in a pale blue dress that had survived the journey relatively unwrinkled. She found her way downstairs to discover Martha already bustling about the kitchen, the smell of coffee and baking bread filling the air. "Good morning, miss," Martha greeted her cheerfully. "You're an early riser, just like Mr. O'Malley. He's already been out checking the property for storm damage since dawn." "Is there anything I can help with?" Violet offered. Martha looked surprised but pleased. "Well, if you wouldn't mind setting the table. The Reverend will be joining us for breakfast before meeting with you and Mr. O'Malley." Violet found the dining room and began laying out plates and cutlery from the sideboard. Through the window, she could see men moving about the ranch, repairing minor damage from the storm. In the distance, she spotted O'Malley on horseback, riding back toward the house, his tall figure unmistakable even from afar. By the time breakfast was ready, O'Malley had returned, and a small, round man with a clerical collar had arrived in a mud-spattered buggy. He introduced himself as Reverend Thomas Wilson, the pastor from Wickenburg's small church. "Miss Norwood, what a pleasure to meet you," he said, pumping her hand enthusiastically. "We've all been curious about Mr. O'Malley's bride-to-be." Breakfast was a livelier affair than dinner had been, with Reverend Wilson happily dominating the conversation, sharing news from town and asking Violet polite questions about her journey west. O'Malley remained largely silent, though Violet noticed him watching her interactions with the Reverend carefully. After the meal, they retired to the library to discuss the wedding arrangements. The ceremony would be simple, held on the ranch with only the ranch hands and a few neighbors as witnesses, followed by a small celebration. "Have you brought a suitable dress, my dear?" Reverend Wilson asked. "I have a cream silk dress that should be appropriate," Violet replied, thinking of the one formal gown she'd packed. "Excellent, excellent," the Reverend beamed. He turned to O'Malley. "And the ring?" O'Malley reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, which he placed on the table between them without comment. Reverend Wilson opened it, revealing a gold band set with a small but perfect emerald. Very nice indeed," he approved. Violet stared at the ring, the reality of her impending marriage suddenly overwhelming. In 3 days, she would wear that ring and become Mrs. Lucas O'Malley, bound to this stranger for life. "If you'll excuse me," she said abruptly, rising to her feet, "I need some air." Without waiting for a response, she hurried from the room and out onto the front porch, gulping in the fresh morning air. She gripped the porch railing, trying to steady her racing heart. She didn't hear O'Malley approach until his voice came from just behind her. "Are you unwell?" Violet turned, finding him standing a respectful distance away, his expression unreadable as always. "I'm fine," she replied automatically. "I just needed a moment." He studied her face. "You're afraid of me." It wasn't a question, but Violet answered anyway. "Yes," she saw no point in lying. "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. O'Malley. What have you heard? That you've killed men, that you took this ranch by force, that people fear to cross you." O'Malley was silent for a long moment, looking out over the ranch rather than at her. "Some of what you've heard is true," he finally said. "Some isn't." His eyes, when they returned to her face, held something she hadn't seen before, a flicker of what might have been regret. "I won't hurt you, Miss Norwood. Whatever else you've heard about me, you can believe that." Before she could respond, he turned and went back inside, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The rest of the day passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Martha took measurements to adjust Violet's cream dress, while ranch hands cleared a space in the main house for the ceremony and celebration. O'Malley was largely absent, dealing with ranch business, which gave Violet time to explore her new home. The ranch was impressive, clearly run with efficiency and care. The main house was solidly built, with modern amenities unusual for a frontier home. The bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived was clean and well-maintained, as were the stables and corrals. Whatever else Lucas O'Malley might be, he was a good steward of his property. Toward evening, Violet found herself wandering toward the corral where several horses were being exercised. She had always loved horses, but had rarely had the opportunity to ride in Boston. She leaned against the fence, watching as a young ranch hand put a beautiful palomino through its paces. "You ride?" she startled at O'Malley's voice. He had approached silently, as seemed to be his habit. "A little," she admitted, "though it's been years." He nodded toward the palomino. "That's Lady. She has a gentle disposition, good for a novice rider." He hesitated, then added, "You're welcome to ride her if you'd like, once you're settled." Violet looked at him in surprise. "Thank you. I would like that." An awkward silence fell between them. Violet searched for something to say. "Mr. O'Malley, may I ask you something?" He nodded once. "Why did you really want a wife from back east? There must be eligible women closer to home." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "People here have preconceptions about me, about who I am, what I've done." He kept his eyes on the horses. "I wanted someone who might form their own opinion." "Based on what I've seen so far, or based on what you choose to show me?" Violet countered. That earned her a sharp glance. "Both, I suppose." "And after the wedding, what will be expected of me?" His expression became more guarded. "You'll be my wife. You'll help manage the household, the accounts as we discussed. In time, perhaps children." His voice remained even, but Violet thought she detected a hint of discomfort when he mentioned children. "And at night?" She pressed, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "What will you expect then?" O'Malley's face remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened where he gripped the fence. "I won't force you," he said quietly. "Ever, but I do expect a real marriage in time." Violet nodded, both relieved and somehow more nervous. "Thank you for your honesty." A call from one of the ranch hands drew O'Malley's attention, and he excused himself to deal with some issue in the stables. Violet remained by the corral, watching Lady trot around the enclosure, trying to reconcile the feared man of reputation with the careful, controlled person she was beginning to know. The next 2 days passed in a similar fashion, Violet helping with wedding preparations and trying to learn more about the ranch that would be her home, while O'Malley divided his time between ranch work and brief, awkward interactions with his bride-to-be. She learned more about him through observation and conversations with Martha than from the man himself. He rose before dawn and worked until dark. He ate the same meals as his men, though at a separate table. He read voraciously, everything from Shakespeare to scientific journals. He never raised his voice, but his quiet commands were obeyed instantly. The ranch hands clearly respected him, perhaps feared him, but there was loyalty there too. On the night before the wedding, Violet found herself unable to sleep. She donned a robe over her nightgown and made her way downstairs, thinking to make a cup of tea in the kitchen. As she passed the library, she noticed a light under the door. Hesitating only briefly, she knocked softly. "Come in." O'Malley's voice was a low rumble from within. She pushed open the door to find him seated in an armchair by the fireplace, a book open in his lap, a glass of amber liquid on the table beside him. He stood when she entered. "Miss Norwood," he acknowledged, looking somewhat surprised to see her. "I couldn't sleep," she explained. "I was going to make some tea." He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Please sit. I can have Martha—" "No, don't wake her," Violet interrupted. "I can manage tea myself." He nodded and sank back into his chair, watching as she moved to the small sideboard where a kettle was kept warm by the fire. She found tea leaves and cups, going through the familiar motions of brewing tea. "Would you like some?" she offered. "Thank you," he replied, closing his book as she handed him a cup. Violet took the seat across from him, cradling her own cup. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the room. "What are you reading?" she asked, nodding toward the book in his lap. He held it up so she could see the cover. "Walden" by Henry David Thoreau. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately," Violet quoted. O'Malley looked at her with what might have been surprise. "To front only the essential facts of life," he continued the quote, "and see if I could not learn what it had to teach." "You've read Thoreau?" she asked. "I have a lot of time for reading during the winter months," he replied. "Thoreau's ideas about self-reliance resonate here in the West." "Is that why you came here? To live deliberately?" He took a sip of tea before answering. "Partly. Mostly I came to start over." He set down his cup. What about you? If not for your father's arrangement, what would you have done with your life? Violet was surprised by the question. Few men had ever asked about her aspirations. I enjoyed working with my father's business, she admitted. The organization, the correspondence, seeing how all the pieces fit together. I had hoped to take on more responsibility, perhaps even run it myself someday. She gave a rueful smile. That was never likely, even before the business failed. A woman in charge would have scared away the investors. Their loss, O'Malley said simply. Intelligence shouldn't be wasted because of convention. Violet studied him over the rim of her cup. You're not what I expected, Mr. O'Malley. No. His expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested interest. No, she confirmed, though I'm still not sure what to make of you. That makes two of us, he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for a few minutes, drinking their tea and watching the fire. Finally, Violet gathered her courage to ask the question that had been troubling her. Are you certain about tomorrow, about marrying me? O'Malley's eyes met hers directly. Yes. Are you? I don't feel I have much choice. You do, he said, his voice firm. If you want to leave, I'll arrange transport back to Boston tomorrow. I'll still settle your father's debts. Violet stared at him, stunned by the offer. Why would you do that? He set down his empty cup. Because a forced marriage benefits neither of us in the long run. But the wedding preparations, the guests, don't matter, he interrupted. Your well-being does. Violet was speechless. This man, who by all accounts was ruthless and cold-blooded, was offering her a way out with no benefit to himself. It contradicted everything she'd heard about Lucas O'Malley. I'll stay, she said finally. I gave my word, and besides, there's nothing for me in Boston anymore. She hesitated, then added, but I appreciate the offer, Mr. O'Malley. It changes things. He nodded once, then rose to his feet. You should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. Violet stood as well, suddenly aware of how intimate the situation was, both of them in night clothes, alone by firelight. Yes, of course. Good night, Mr. O'Malley. Good night, Miss Norwood. He hesitated, then added, after tomorrow, I hope you'll call me Lucas. And you must call me Violet, she replied. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Violet, he repeated, as if testing how the name felt. Good night then, Violet. As she climbed the stairs back to her room, Violet realized that, for the first time since arriving in Arizona, she was no longer afraid of Lucas O'Malley. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Martha helped Violet dress in her cream silk gown, arranging her dark hair in an elegant style adorned with a few wildflowers gathered from the hills around the ranch. You look beautiful, Miss Norwood, Martha declared, stepping back to admire her work. Mr. O'Malley won't know what hit him. Violet smiled nervously, smoothing the fabric of her dress. Is everything ready downstairs? All set, Martha assured her. The Reverend arrived half an hour ago and the guests are starting to gather. About 20 people in all, the ranch hands, a few neighbors, the doctor from town and his wife. A knock at the door interrupted them. Martha opened it to reveal a young ranch hand holding a small package. Mr. O'Malley asked me to deliver this to Miss Norwood, he said, handing the package to Martha before quickly retreating. Martha brought the package to Violet. It was wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with string. A wedding gift, I suppose, she said with a smile. I'll give you a moment of privacy. When Martha had left, Violet carefully opened the package. Inside was a small wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of leaves and vines. She lifted the lid to find a delicate gold necklace with a small emerald pendant that matched the ring she would soon wear. Beneath the necklace was a folded note. Violet opened it to find a brief message in a strong, clear hand. For new beginnings. Violet felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. She lifted the necklace and fastened it around her neck, the emerald resting just below her collarbone. When Martha returned, she noticed the necklace immediately. "That's lovely, from Mr. O'Malley." Violet nodded, touching the stone gently. "Would you tell him? Tell him thank you and that I'm wearing it," Martha smiled knowingly. "Of course, dear." Downstairs, the main room of the house had been transformed. Chairs were arranged in rows facing the large stone fireplace, which had been decorated with wildflowers and greenery. A small group of people stood in clusters, talking quietly. Violet remained upstairs until Martha returned to escort her down. As she descended the staircase, the conversations below ceased, all eyes turning toward her. At the front of the room, standing beside Reverend Wilson, was Lucas O'Malley. He had cleaned up remarkably well, dressed in a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His usually unruly hair tamed for the occasion. But it was his expression that caught Violet's attention for the first time. His carefully controlled facade had slipped, revealing naked admiration as he watched her descend the stairs. Violet made her way to his side, and the ceremony began. It was simple and brief, with the traditional exchange of vows and rings. When Lucas placed the emerald ring on her finger, his hands were steady, his touch gentle. When Reverend Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas hesitated only a moment before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on her lips, their first physical contact, beyond handshakes. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful. There was food, drink, even some music when one of the ranch hands produced a fiddle. Lucas remained by Violet's side, introducing her to neighbors and ranch hands, his hand occasionally coming to rest lightly at the small of her back. As the afternoon wore on, Violet found herself seated beside an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Henderson, from a neighboring ranch. "I've known Lucas since he first came to the territory," Mrs. Henderson told her, her eyes twinkling. "Caused quite a stir. He did a handsome Easterner with those city manners, working as a foreman for old Blackwell." "What was he like then?" Violet couldn't help asking. Mrs. Henderson considered the question. "Quiet, kept to himself, efficient in his work, fair with the men." There was talk. Of course, always is when someone keeps their past to themselves. Talk. Oh, that he was running from the law or from a broken heart. Mrs. Henderson waved her hand dismissively. People always need to create stories when they don't know the truth. "And what happened with the Blackwell Ranch?" "I heard Mr. O'Malley acquired this property after a fire." Mrs. Henderson's expression grew more serious. "That's a dark chapter. Old Blackwell was not a good man, cruel to his horses, cruel to his men. There was a dispute over water rights, and Blackwell threatened one of Lucas's ranch hands, a young Mexican boy, hardly more than a child. Lucas stood up to him, and Blackwell fired him on the spot." She lowered her voice. "A week later, Blackwell's ranch house caught fire in the night. Blackwell didn't make it out. Some said Lucas had a hand in it, but the sheriff found no evidence of that. Lucas bought the property when it went up for sale, rebuilt everything from the ground up." Violet absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the man she was coming to know. "Do you believe he was involved in the fire?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. "My dear, I believe Lucas O'Malley is a man who protects what's his. Whether that extended to setting a fire, I couldn't say. But I will tell you this: things have been more peaceful in this valley since he took over, and that's a fact." The celebration continued until sunset, when the guests gradually began to depart. As the last buggy pulled away, Violet found herself standing on the porch beside Lucas, watching the golden light fade from the hills. "Was it what you expected?" he asked quietly. "It was lovely," she replied honestly. "Thank you for the necklace, it's beautiful." He nodded, his eyes moving to where the emerald rested against her skin. "It suits you." An awkward silence fell between them. They were married now, but Violet had no idea what would happen next. Would he expect to consummate the marriage tonight? The thought sent a flutter of anxiety through her stomach. As if reading her thoughts, Lucas cleared his throat. "I've had your things moved to the master bedroom," he said. "I'll be staying in the room across the hall for now." Violet looked at him in surprise. "But you need time," he interrupted. "I understand that. I'll wait until you're ready." Relief and confusion warred within her. "Thank you," she managed. He inclined his head slightly. "Good night, Mrs. O'Malley." The new name startled her. Mrs. O'Malley. She was a married woman now, with a new identity, a new life. "Good night." "Lucas," she replied, testing his first name on her tongue. As she prepared for bed in the large master bedroom, Violet reflected on the day's events and the man who was now her husband. Lucas O'Malley remained an enigma, a man of violence by reputation, yet capable of unexpected kindness and consideration. She touched the emerald at her throat, thinking of his note. New beginnings, indeed. The next week brought significant adjustments as Violet settled into her role as mistress of the O'Malley Ranch. Lucas showed her the account books as promised, explaining the ranch's operations, expenses, and income streams. Violet was impressed by his meticulous record-keeping and the ranch's healthy financial position. "You don't actually need help with the books," she observed after examining his ledgers. "Everything is perfectly organized." Lucas shrugged. "I manage, but I'd rather spend my time elsewhere. Besides, you have a better head for numbers than I do." Violet wasn't sure that was true, but she appreciated his confidence in her abilities. She began taking over correspondence with cattle buyers and suppliers, quickly gaining a comprehensive understanding of the ranch's business operations. Her days fell into a routine. Mornings were spent on household management with Martha, afternoons on bookkeeping and correspondence, and evenings often found her in the library, reading or sometimes conversing with Lucas when he returned from his work around the ranch. True to his word, Lucas maintained a respectful distance, sleeping in a separate bedroom and never pressing for more intimacy than she offered. Their relationship was cordial, occasionally even warm, but maintained a careful formality that left Violet both relieved and increasingly curious about the man she had married. On her 10th day at the ranch, Lucas appeared at breakfast with an unexpected proposition. "I need to ride the north boundary today," he said. "The terrain is easy and the weather's good. Would you like to come? See more of the ranch?" Violet brightened at the suggestion. "I'd like that very much." After breakfast, she changed into her most practical dress and boots, while Lucas had lady saddled for her. He provided basic riding instruction in the corral, refreshing Violet's limited experience, before they set off across the rolling grassland that comprised the northern section of the ranch. It was a glorious day for riding, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. Lucas rode beside her on his black gelding, occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining features of the landscape. "That ridge marks the edge of our property," he explained, indicating a distant line of rocky outcroppings. "Beyond that is Pearson land. Old Jacob Pearson runs about 100 head of cattle, mostly on his southern pastures." Violet was enjoying herself immensely. The freedom of riding across the open country, the breathtaking vistas of mountains and valleys, the simple pleasure of learning about the land that was now her home, all of it combined to create a sense of contentment she hadn't expected to find in her arranged marriage. They stopped to rest by a small creek around midday. Lucas produced a simple packed lunch from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried beef, and apples, which they ate sitting on rocks beside the gurgling water. "How did you come to own this land?" Violet asked, emboldened by the casual setting. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned you worked for someone named Blackwell first." Lucas was silent for a long moment, and Violet feared she had overstepped. But then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "I came west after the war," he said. "Needed a fresh start. Took work as a ranch hand, then foreman for James Blackwell. He owned this land then." "What happened?" Violet prompted gently when he paused. Lucas stared out across the creek. "Blackwell was a cruel man, abused his horses, his cattle, his workers, especially the Mexican hands." His jaw tightened. "There was a boy, Miguel, barely 15. Hard worker. Blackwell caught him watering his horse from the main well during a drought when he'd ordered everyone to use the creek only. Beat him badly." Violet's hand flew to her mouth. "That's terrible." Lucas nodded grimly. "I intervened. Blackwell fired me, threatened to make sure I never worked in the territory again. And then, a week later, his house caught fire in the night. He'd been drinking heavily, didn't wake up." Lucas's voice was flat, emotionless. "The property went up for auction. I had savings from the war. Bought it, rebuilt it." Violet studied his face, trying to read between the carefully chosen words. "People think you started the fire. People think a lot of things." His green eyes met hers directly. "Does it matter to you what really happened?" Violet considered the question. Did it matter? If Lucas had been responsible for Blackwell's death, could she reconcile that with the man she was coming to know, the man who treated his workers fairly, who had given her time and space, who had offered her a way out of their marriage even after all the arrangements had been made? "I think," she said slowly, "that justice takes different forms in different places. And I think a man who would beat a child deserves whatever justice finds him." Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a softening around the eyes, a release of tension in his shoulders. He didn't acknowledge her implied acceptance verbally, but he didn't need to. The look that passed between them said enough. They finished their lunch and continued riding, the conversation turning to lighter topics: the names of distant mountains, the wildflowers blooming across the grassland, stories about the horses they rode. By the time they returned to the ranch in late afternoon, Violet felt a new connection with her husband, a tentative bridge across the gulf that had separated them. That evening after dinner, instead of retreating to her room or the library as was her habit, Violet joined Lucas on the porch. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell, the first stars appearing in the velvet sky above them. "Thank you for today," Violet said finally. "It was wonderful to see more of the ranch." "You rode well," Lucas replied. "Lady's taken to you." "I've taken to her as well," Violet smiled. "And to this place. It's beautiful in a way I never expected." Lucas nodded. "It grows on you." Violet gathered her courage. "Lucas, I want to understand something. You said you wanted a wife who was educated, who could help with the business. But surely there were women closer to hand who could have done that. Why go to the expense and trouble of arranging a marriage with someone across the country?" He was quiet for so long that Violet thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. "After the war, after what happened with Blackwell, people here saw me a certain way, as someone dangerous, violent." He looked down at his hands. "Not without reason. I've done things I'm not proud of." He continued, "The local families. They respect me, fear me maybe, but they don't want their daughters marrying me, and the women who might have been interested." He shook his head. "They wanted the reputation, not the man." "So you wanted someone who didn't know your reputation," Violet surmised. "Someone who might see past it," he corrected. "Someone who might judge me on what I am now, not what I've been." Violet considered his words. Is that why you've been so patient with me, giving me time, separate rooms? Partly, he admitted. And partly because I want more than just a convenient arrangement. He trailed off, seemingly unable to articulate what he wanted. A real marriage, Violet finished for him. His eyes found hers in the darkness. Yes, eventually, if that's something you could want too. The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep within Violet. This man, who presented such a hard exterior to the world, was offering her a glimpse of his true self, uncertain, hopeful, human. I think, she said carefully, that I'm beginning to see the man behind the reputation. And I like what I see, Lucas. She reached across the space between their chairs and placed her hand over his. His skin was warm and rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle as he turned his hand to clasp hers. They sat that way for a long time, hands joined, watching the stars brighten in the desert sky, the silence between them no longer awkward but filled with possibility. That night, Violet lay awake long after retiring to her room, thinking about Lucas and their conversation. She was beginning to understand the complex man. She had married a man capable of violence, yes, but also of compassion, consideration, and unexpected gentleness. The next few weeks brought them closer, as shared meals, rides across the ranch, and evening conversations built a foundation of mutual respect and growing affection. Lucas began teaching Violet more about the ranch operations, introducing her to the hands by name, explaining the seasonal cycles of cattle raising, showing her how to identify the O'Malley brand on their livestock. Violet, in turn, made the ranch house more of a home. She rearranged furniture, added touches of color with wildflowers and fabrics from town, and worked with Martha to expand their garden. She also took over full management of the ranch's books and correspondence, freeing Lucas to focus on the physical work he preferred. One evening in late June, almost a month after their wedding, a sudden thunderstorm caught them during their now customary after-dinner walk. They raced for the house, laughing as the rain soaked them, arriving on the porch breathless and dripping. "You're drenched," Lucas observed, his own clothes plastered to his body. "So are you," Violet replied, unable to help noticing how the wet shirt clung to the muscles of his chest and shoulders. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek. "Violet," he said, her name almost a question. In answer, she stepped closer, tilting her face up to his. Lucas hesitated only a moment before lowering his head to kiss her, his lips gentle against hers, asking rather than demanding. Violet's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken beneath her palms as she returned the kiss. When they finally parted, both were breathing faster, and Violet felt a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with embarrassment. "I should change into dry clothes," she said, not moving away. "Yes," Lucas agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "So should I." That night, after changing and drying her hair, Violet made a decision. She left her room and crossed the hall, knocking softly on Lucas's door. He opened it immediately, as if he'd been waiting, dressed in a simple shirt and trousers, his hair still damp. Surprise and something like hope flickered across his face when he saw her. "May I come in?" she asked. Lucas stepped back, allowing her to enter. His room was Spartan compared to hers: a bed, a dresser, a chair, a few books on a small table, no decorations or personal items beyond the practical. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Violet shook her head. "No, She took a deep breath. "I don't think we need separate rooms anymore." Lucas went very still. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said simply. I'm your wife, Lucas, in name. I'd like to be your wife in truth. He moved toward her slowly, as if afraid she might change her mind. When he reached her, he cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. I never expected to find someone like you, he said quietly. When I arranged this marriage, I hoped for companionship, perhaps friendship in time. I never thought I'd find. What? Violet prompted when he trailed off. His eyes, usually so guarded, were open and vulnerable as they met hers. Love, he finished. I never thought I'd find love. The word hung in the air between them, a declaration and a question. Violet felt tears prick at her eyes as she realized the truth of her own feelings. Neither did I, she whispered. But here we are. Lucas kissed her then, different from their earlier kiss on the porch, deeper, more certain. Violet wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer as his arms encircled her waist. When the kiss ended, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight, he murmured, and every night after. Yes, Violet agreed. I will. Their first night together was a revelation for Violet. Lucas was a considerate lover, patient and gentle, guiding her through unfamiliar territory with tender care. In his arms, she discovered a passion she hadn't known she possessed, and a connection deeper than she had imagined possible in an arranged marriage. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, Violet traced the scar that cut through his eyebrow. How did you get this? Shrapnel, he replied. At Gettysburg, I was lucky many weren't. You fought for the Union, he nodded. My brother and I both enlisted. He didn't come home. Violet pressed a kiss to the scar. I'm sorry about your brother. James was the better of us, Lucas said quietly. Kinder, more forgiving. After he died, I hardened, became someone else for a while. And now, his arms tightened around her. Now I'm trying to be the kind of man he would have been proud of, the kind of man you could be proud of. I am proud of you, Violet told him. Of who you are now, of what you've built here. Lucas's smile was soft in the darkness. Get some sleep, Mrs. O'Malley. Tomorrow comes early on a ranch. Violet nestled closer, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart as she drifted into sleep, content in a way she had never expected to be in this arranged marriage. The months that followed were the happiest of Violet's life. Her relationship with Lucas deepened as they shared not only their days and nights but their thoughts, hopes, and even fears. Lucas gradually opened up about his past, his childhood in New York, his experiences in the war, the dark period afterward when rage and grief had driven him to actions he now regretted. Violet, in turn, shared her own pain, the loss of her mother, her father's emotional distance, her frustrated ambitions in a society that offered women limited opportunities. In each other, they found understanding and acceptance that neither had experienced before. By autumn, Violet had fully embraced her role as mistress of the O'Malley Ranch. She had learned to ride well enough to accompany Lucas on most of his rounds, had developed friendly relationships with neighboring ranchers' wives, and had even begun teaching reading to some of the ranch hands' children who had no access to formal schooling. Lucas, meanwhile, had softened visibly in the presence of Violet's love. He smiled more, laughed occasionally, and even began joining in community events in Wickenburg that he had previously avoided. The fearsome reputation that had once defined him gradually gave way to a new one, still a man to be respected, but also a fair employer, a generous neighbor, and a devoted husband. One crisp October morning, Violet woke feeling unusually tired and queasy. She dismissed it as a passing illness, but when the symptoms persisted for several days, Martha approached her with a knowing smile. Begging your pardon, Mrs. O'Malley, but have you considered you might be expecting? Violet's hand flew to her stomach. A baby, do you think so? Martha nodded. I've seen it enough times to recognize the signs. You're tired all the time, sick in the mornings. Certain foods suddenly don't agree with you. That evening, Violet shared Martha's suspicion with Lucas. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, shock giving way to joy, his usually controlled features transformed by a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "A child," he said in wonder, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child, Doctor." Wilson from Wickenburg confirmed the pregnancy the following week, estimating that Violet would deliver in early spring. As her body changed with the growing life inside her, Lucas became even more attentive, ensuring she rested enough, ate well, and wasn't overtaxed by her duties. Christmas that year was a joyous occasion. Lucas surprised Violet with a beautifully crafted cradle he had commissioned from a carpenter in town, and Violet gifted him with a portrait she had secretly arranged of the two of them, to be hung in the nursery they were preparing. "I want our child to see their parents together," she explained. "To know they came from love." Lucas kissed her tenderly. "They will never doubt it," he promised. Winter passed in comfortable domesticity, the ranch quieter during the cold months, giving Violet and Lucas more time together. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading aloud to each other, planning for their child's future, strengthening the bond between them. As spring approached and Violet's time drew near, Lucas arranged for a midwife to stay at the ranch. Mrs. Ramirez was experienced and kind, with a calm demeanor that reassured the increasingly nervous parents-to-be. "First babies often take their time," she told them, "but everything looks to be proceeding normally." The labor began on a beautiful April morning, just as the wildflowers were beginning to carpet the hills around the ranch. Violet's waters broke while she was having breakfast, sending the household into carefully prepared action. Martha and Mrs. Ramirez helped her to the bedroom, while Lucas was banished to the hallway after one too many anxious questions. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Outside the bedroom door, Lucas paced endlessly, wincing at each cry of pain from his wife, deaf to the reassurances of ranch hands who stopped by with support and congratulations. Finally, as dawn was breaking on the second day, a new cry joined Violet's, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Lucas froze in his tracks, staring at the door as if it might open of its own accord, when Mrs. Ramirez finally emerged, her tired face wreathed in smiles. Lucas could barely form the question. "They're both fine," the midwife assured him. "You have a healthy son and your wife is tired but well. You can go in now." Lucas entered the bedroom to find Violet propped up against pillows, her face pale and exhausted but radiant with joy. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Lucas approached the bed with reverence, sitting carefully beside his wife and child. When Violet placed the infant in his arms, he held his breath, afraid to disturb the perfect tiny being with his rough hands. The baby's face was red and somewhat squashed from birth, with a dusting of dark hair and tightly closed eyes. As Lucas watched, those eyes fluttered open, revealing a deep blue that would likely change in the coming months. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "What shall we call him?" Violet smiled tiredly. "I thought perhaps James, after your brother, if you'd like." Lucas looked at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "James," he repeated. "James Norwood O'Malley. A good name." He leaned forward to kiss Violet's forehead. "Thank you," he murmured. "For our son, for everything." Violet reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with tender familiarity. "I was so afraid when I came here," she admitted. "Terrified of the man I was being forced to marry." If only I had known what I would find behind those quiet eyes of yours." "And what did you find?" Lucas asked, his gaze holding hers. Violet smiled. "Everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a purpose." Her smile deepened. "Love." Lucas bent to kiss her, careful of the baby between them. "I love you, Violet O'Malley, more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Lucas O'Malley," she replied. "My fearsome cowboy with the gentle heart." Outside the window, the sun rose fully over the Arizona hills, bathing the room in golden light. A new day for their new family, built from an arrangement neither had wanted, but that had given them everything they needed. Little James thrived in the warm, loving environment of the ranch. Violet recovered quickly from the birth, and soon resumed many of her duties, though now with a baby often cradled in one arm or sleeping nearby in a basket. Lucas proved to be a devoted father, spending time with his son each evening, even reading aloud from his books to the infant who couldn't possibly understand, but seemed to enjoy his father's deep, rumbling voice. As James grew from newborn to infant to toddler, the O'Malley Ranch prospered as well. Under Violet's careful management of the accounts and Lucas's skilled handling of the livestock and land, they expanded their operations, purchasing additional acreage and increasing their herd. Violet also continued her informal school for the ranch hands' children, which had grown to include a dozen students of various ages. With Lucas's support, she converted one of the outbuildings into a proper schoolroom and arranged for books and supplies from back east. "You're changing lives," Lucas told her one evening after watching her work with the children, "giving them opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise." "We're changing lives," Violet corrected him. "Your support makes it possible." By the time James celebrated his 3rd birthday, Violet was pregnant again. Their daughter, Elizabeth Martha O'Malley, arrived with considerably less drama than her brother, born after a relatively short labor on a summer afternoon. "She has your eyes," Lucas observed, cradling his newborn daughter while 3-year-old James peered curiously at his sister from his mother's lap. "And your determination," Violet laughed as the infant grasped her father's finger with surprising strength. The O'Malley family continued to grow and flourish. By their 10th wedding anniversary, they had added another son, William, to their family. The fearsome reputation that had once defined Lucas O'Malley had long since been replaced by respect for a fair, honest rancher who stood up for his community and cared deeply for his family. Violet, once a reluctant bride sent west to marry a man she feared, had become a respected figure in her own right, a capable ranch mistress, a dedicated teacher, and a loving wife and mother. The arranged marriage that had begun in fear and uncertainty had blossomed into one of the strongest partnerships in the territory. On the evening of their anniversary, after the children were asleep, Lucas and Violet sat on the porch of their home, just as they had done so many times over the years. The ranch spread out before them, peaceful in the gathering dusk. "You ever regret it?" Lucas asked suddenly. "Being sent here to marry a stranger?" Violet turned to him, studying the face she had come to know as well as her own, the lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the scar through his eyebrow that she had kissed countless times, the mouth that could be stern with ranch hands but was always gentle with her and their children. "Never," she said firmly. "Coming here was the best thing that ever happened to me, though I couldn't see it at the time." She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "What about you? Do you regret arranging to marry a woman you'd never met?" Lucas brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "The only regret I have is that I spent so many years alone before finding you." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Violet leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the life they had built together. The forced marriage that had once filled her with dread had become her greatest blessing, all because she had found the courage to look beyond fear and discover the kindness behind Lucas O'Malley's quiet eyes.